B. Collins.
Democracy dies in Michigan. I'm Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, December 8th, 2016. And it's Deja Vu 2000, when a recount was underway in the contested presidential election in Florida, and the Supreme Court intervened in a 5-4 vote and said, stop counting ballots. Well, that's what's happened in Michigan. The same federal judge who on Monday ordered that the recount begin without delay has had to yield to a state appeals court, packed with Republicans, who decided that Jill Stein doesn't have standing to demand a recount to begin with, because she only got 1-point-something% of the vote. I think it's 1.1% in Michigan. And therefore, under Michigan election law, she is not an aggrieved party who had some prospect of changing the outcome of the election through the recount. Now, this occurs despite the revelations of serious election anomalies, discrepancies, and failings in critical counties in the state of Michigan, sufficient to flip the result and deny a victory to Donald Trump. As you know, the margin there is less than 11,000 votes. And we know that tens of thousands of people who voted in Detroit, in Wayne County, are filed under what is called an undervote. They voted for Congress or Senate or other offices, but mysteriously their vote for president was not counted. And the efforts to hand examine those ballots, those have now been stopped. The federal judge said because there is no basis for this court to ignore the Michigan court's ruling and make an independent judgment regarding what the Michigan legislature intended by the term aggrieved, plaintiffs, referring to Stein, have not shown an entitlement to a recount. In Wayne County alone, we know that tabulators failed. They failed massively on election night, but this wasn't revealed until the recount was begun. And we also know that there are serious issues with what is called the chain of custody. Ballots that were stuffed into plastic storage bins, and in some cases sealed, in other cases not sealed. But the count of the ballots in the bins doesn't match either the voter rolls in a precinct or even the little sticky note on the outside of the container. And as a result, those ballots were considered unrecountable. But the suspicion is, and my friend Brad Friedman, the election integrity activist, bradblog.com, providing excellent coverage of this. Be sure to visit there for more details. But Brad is a stickler for terminology, and he says, this isn't really a recount in so many cases because some of these ballots are being counted for the first time. And so this is a sorry debacle in the state of Michigan. And as a result, the state's certified results from November 28th will stand, even though we know that those are shaky figures, not entirely constructed on quicksand, but in some cases close to it. In one Detroit precinct, the ballot box that was supposed to contain 306 ballots only had 50. But even those 50 will not be recounted because under Michigan law, if the ballots are not properly sealed in some sort of a container, they cannot be recounted. And more than 59% of the precincts in Detroit could be disqualified from the recount because the number of ballots in secured boxes doesn't match the number of ballots in the poll book. In Oakland County, that's suburbs of Detroit, 26 of the 520 precincts were not recountable. And in Ingham County, 23 of 208 precincts not recountable. So this is a very slipshod system in the state of Michigan. And because a Republican court has determined that Jill Stein doesn't have standing, the obvious miscarriage of an election here is going to be certified and will stand despite the evidence that we can all see. And Rebecca Solnit, a talented writer based here in San Francisco, published an interview with Jill Stein in The Guardian today. I'm linking to it in the show file for today's podcast. There's a lot of interesting commentary here about voting processes, about hackable touchscreen machines, and about the issues in Michigan. And Jill Stein says, what is happening in Detroit, which is enabled by state law, is a systematic violation of basic constitutional voting rights. This is really the underlying question about this voting machine technology, which is that it's extremely prone to fail in poor communities and communities of color. The U.S. Civil Rights Commission showed that the odds of your vote being miscounted or discounted increases 900% in communities of color. They were referring to the so-called spoiled vote. A spoiled vote is when you have filled out your paper ballot, you put it into a counting machine, an optical scanner, and those scanners are highly prone to malfunction if they're not properly calibrated. Now, Jill Stein also reveals that the campaign that has the most to gain from a recount, and it's not hard to guess which one that is, the Clinton campaign, has shown only tepid interest in the recounts that have been paid for and initiated by Jill Stein. She says, quote, when the Clinton team weighed in, which was, shall we say, minimalist and a day late, it was, she said, with about as passive an expression of interest as one could imagine. And this is really crucial, because I'm under no illusions. The Republicans will use every effort to delay recounts and to block them from being counted. And I have no illusions that we're going to see the outcome of this election changed. But for the Clinton campaign to lay down, in the face of the obvious evidence of the ways that the election was manipulated, is really an insult to every thinking American, whether you voted for Clinton or not, whether you wanted Trump to be elected or not. And again, we are shamed as an alleged democracy operating in such an obviously undemocratic fashion. So I got a note from the Swami Beyondananda this morning, passing along word that there is a petition drive underway at the White House, asking President Obama as one of his final acts to investigate the presidential election. The petition reads, Dear President Obama, we're proud Americans who are deeply concerned about the many lines of evidence that raise serious concerns about the integrity of our recent election. Never before have we had a declared winner state that millions of people voted illegally. And I don't actually agree with this next part, but I'll read it anyway. Never before has a foreign nation so directly intervened in our election process as Russia did with the DNC hacks and its support of fake news sites. And we'll talk more about Russia in a moment. The petition continues, we're deeply concerned by the dramatic shift from exit polls to final vote tallies, particularly in key swing states. The vulnerabilities of electronic voting machines to hacking and fraud are well documented. There are many motivated and skilled parties who could have attempted to affect the results. In addition, we're very concerned that Jill Stein's recount efforts have been actively undermined by lawsuits rather than embraced as part of protecting our democracy. To restore the trust and faith of the American public in this election and future ones, we need an immediate, rigorous investigation by respected national forensics experts, particularly in the most closely contested states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. The investigation should be led by the Attorney General's office before electors meet in the Electoral College on December 19th. Now, this is something that I think is worth pursuing, if only for the value in raising attention and generating some news coverage. But I don't think Obama's going to lift a finger. He's never shown any interest in election integrity issues. Yes, voting rights issues, I understand that, but not the actual mechanical process of the elections and these obvious discrepancies that have surfaced. So I embrace this petition, except for the Russia part, and it should be up at whitehouse.gov shortly. And I hope that if you're so inclined, you will lend your support to the petition. Meanwhile, Democrats are mounting pressure on the Obama White House to disclose more about the allegations of Russia's role in the U.S. election. Now, I remain highly skeptical, and I'll change my position when I see proof. But I haven't seen any proof. And I am sticking with Bill Binney, the former top technical director at the NSA, whose view is that the NSA knows who hacked the DNC and John Podesta's email account and could put that evidence out there at any time. And if it's Russia, I'll accept it if there's real evidence. But we saw that phony news conference with the proven perjurer James Clapper on October 7th, and he trotted out there with the Homeland Security guy Jay Johnson, and they used weasel words to suggest that Russia was involved, saying it was consistent with Russian behavior, but they offered zero proof. And from that, Hillary Clinton, in the final debate, I think it was, she said, 17 intelligence agencies have asserted that Russia hacked our election, trying to manipulate it. Well, I hate to agree with Donald Trump, but he most recently told Time magazine, which named him Man of the Year, not a big surprise, that he doesn't believe it. He told Time he believes U.S. intelligence is accusing Russia of the hack because of politics. He rejected their conclusion. Quote, I don't believe it. I don't believe they interfered. Well, it's really strange to be holding an opinion that is held by Donald Trump. I think you can appreciate the deep irony of that. But the senior House Democrats are following up on a letter that came from some of the members of the Intelligence Committee asking for a classified briefing for colleagues on Russian entities hacking of American political organizations, hacking and strategic release of emails from campaign officials, the WikiLeaks disclosures, fake news stories produced and distributed with the intent to mislead American voters, and any other Russian or Russian-related interference or involvement in our recent election. Well, the United States intervenes covertly in a lot of elections and a lot of other activities around the world. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia was monitoring what we were doing. But again, we have seen no proof, and there is an explicit denial from Julian Assange that Russia was the source of the DNC and Podesta hacks. Now, my friend Norman Solomon wrote an opinion piece published at The Hill yesterday. It's entitled, McCarthy's Ghost Smiles as Dems Point the Finger at Russia. Norman Solomon wrote the book about how we are tricked into war. If you've never picked it up, the book is called War Made Easy, How I think Politicians and Pundits Keep Spinning Us into War. And Norman knows a lot about the history of Joe McCarthy, going back to the 1950s and the Red Scare, and he links it to the recent actions by Democrats. Because last week, when the House approved with only 30 dissenters the Intelligence Authorization Act for 2017 and sent it to the Senate, Adam Schiff, a Democrat from Southern California who has occasionally been on the right side of surveillance and related issues, nevertheless said that the bill includes important provisions aimed at countering Russia's destabilizing efforts, including those targeting our elections. And Solomon singles out what are called by Schiff the important provisions of Section 501, which sets up in the executive branch an interagency committee to counter active measures by the Russian Federation to exert covert influence. Now, this is a potential McCarthy panel because the way it's set up, and Democrats have approved this, all right, it enables the president and the FBI director to choose the members of the panel. And so you're going to get knuckle-dragging people like Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, and real idiots who will toe the line. And now this is interesting because, of course, Trump himself doesn't buy into the Russian theories, the theories of Russian involvement. But you give him a panel like this where he can demonize people in the United States for allegedly carrying water for the Russians, well, this could become the next McCarthy kind of red-baiting scare. Solomon writes, today, congressional leaders of both parties seem glad to pretend that Section 501 is just fine, rather than an odious and dangerous threat to precious constitutional freedoms. On automatic pilot, many senators will vote aye without a second thought. He goes on, most Democratic leaders, for their part, seem determined to implicitly or even explicitly scapegoat the Russian government for the presidential election results. Rather than clearly assess the impacts of Hillary Clinton's coziness with Wall Street or even the role of the FBI director just before the election, the Democratic line seems bent on playing an anti-Russia card. The Democrats are playing with fire. The likely burn victims are the First Amendment and other precious freedoms. One other interesting analysis of Hillary Clinton's loss comes from Mike Pyle. He's based here in California, and his company helps people select names for nonprofits, for businesses, for projects. He's a naming expert. He's an expert at the name game. And he says that the Clinton for President slogan, "I'm with her," may be the most tone-deaf campaign slogan ever written. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Mike Pyle.
Yeah, I agree with you, Peter. The New York Times did a really insightful op-ed piece about identity politics and the liberal message and the liberal brand, and to oversimplify it, it was basically since Bill Clinton that the administration and the Democratic Party embraced identity politics, being elites and college education, and sort of lost their association with another identity group, the working class, the white working class. And it's quite ironic that the Clinton campaign missed that move, and identity politics by definition is not unifying, right? You think you want messages that bring people together and unite people, and it's arguable what those messages might be, but it's clear that "I'm with her" is identity politics of one, and compare that with Donald Trump's campaign message, which was "Make America Great Again." That's an identity politics of over 300 million people, right? It's all Americans, and no matter what stripe you are, it's inarguable that despite when you intellectually parse "Make America Great Again," I think it's inarguably that's a powerful slogan that anybody of any political stripe, of any demographic, of any socioeconomic background can get behind that. Absolutely, we want to make America great. Sure, it's offensive to many. By definition, it's polarizing, but at the same time, it is a much more unifying an optimistic message and an aspirational message than the Clinton campaign's, which was "I'm with her."
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Mike Pyle. It's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, and all of our other outlets. And it's available for the first 14 days exclusively to my subscribers. So if you're curious about this, why don't you become a subscriber? Come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. That takes you over to the sign-up page, and you can either set up a PayPal account, $5, $10, $20 a month, or $50 annual subscription. And if you're allergic to PayPal, I understand. You can send a check, cash, or money order to my P.O. Box, which is listed on the sign-up page. It's Box 100, Mill Valley, California, 94942. And it is the season. At the end of the year here, a lot of people like to give gifts or make extra contributions, so feel free to support me in that way. And if you'd like to give a gift subscription to a friend or colleague or loved one, just email Peter at peterbcollins.com, and I will help you set that up. Well, Donald Trump is dropping more hints about what he's going to do to address the obvious conflicts of interest that his business enterprises pose to his ascent to the presidency. And it's a week from today that he's going to hold a news conference where he says he will announce the legal changes to insulate himself from those conflicts. Now, yesterday, they surprised us by telling us that in June, Trump sold all of the stock that he owned. There's no proof of this. There's no documentation. We don't have a list of the shares that he sold or the companies that he did have an interest in. But presumably, if that's true, then the only thing left is his own business empire. And he is hinting that Ivanka, the older daughter, will be leaving the Trump organization along with her husband, Jared Kushner. They may wind up with posts, maybe unpaid volunteer posts in the administration. That is not clear so far. But the Donald says that his two sons, Don Jr. and Eric, will be put in charge of the company. Now, here in San Francisco, the Chronicle has a very funny cartoonist. His name is Don Asmussen. His cartoon is called The Bad Reporter. And his latest cartoon says that Trump is going to put his holdings into a blonde trust instead of a blind trust. I got a kick out of that. Also, a little note from an article in the New York Times about this is that Richard Painter, who served as the chief White House ethics lawyer when George W. Bush was bending the rules, he is now taking a job with Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, where he will presumably be a watchdog on the Trump conflicts of interest. What's notable here is that CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, was, I think, a notable independent agency when it was run by its founder, Melanie Sloan. But a couple of years ago, David Brock, who is the Clintons' dark actor, he muscled in, got on the board, and kicked Melanie Sloan out. So, in my view, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington is now little more than a political front for the interests of David Brock and his sponsors in the Clinton family. Trump has completed or added, he hasn't finished, but he has added another obvious poke-in-the-eye member to his cabinet, which I call the Wrecking Crew. And once again, Trump has selected somebody who is diametrically opposed to the mission of the agency who he has named to run as the cabinet officer. So at the Department of Labor, which is supposed to represent those working white people who put Trump over the edge, electorally anyway, they've announced that Andrew Puzder, who is the CEO of the fast food company that owns Hardee's and Carl's Jr., those are two different chains, he is going to be named Secretary of Labor. Now, this is a guy who's publicly opposed efforts to expand eligibility for overtime pay, and he is against any significant increases in the minimum wage, claiming, according to the Republican mantra, that it only cuts employment opportunities for low-skilled workers. That's total bullshit. And we've seen over the years when the minimum wage has increased, the economy absorbs it in ways that are not binary. You know, it's not you give $1 here, you take $1 there. It does really get absorbed, and it floats all boats. Also, this guy Puzder, or Putzter, sorry, he supports repealing the Obamacare Affordable Care Act, which he says has helped create a restaurant recession because rising premiums have left middle and working class people with less money to spend on gut-wrenching fast food. Now, I do have friends in the restaurant business who say that the Affordable Care Act has been a burden for them. And I do respect that businesses that operate on tight margins have issues. I know my brother-in-law, Tony, who runs a car wash in Michigan, an early Trump supporter on the issue of the minimum wage. I know he's dancing to hear that somebody opposed to minimum wage increases has been named Secretary of Labor. And we will see if the U.S. Senate does anything about it. I want to take a moment to talk about the human cost of the wars on some drugs. In The Guardian today, there's an important recap of a story that goes back a few years on the 3 nights in 2011 when 50 different women disappeared from the city of Jalapa, which is the capital of Veracruz state. And we're now learning, because of investigations, that many of these women were full-time sex workers, others were wannabe beauty queens, and they partied with political leaders and members of a drug cartel. Well, the fate of these women remains unknown, but relatives believe that they were disappeared and are dead. And the statistics are staggering. Since Mexico cracked down when Felipe Calderon was elected 10 years ago, more than 200,000 people have been murdered in Mexico. At least 28,000 have disappeared since 2007. And in Veracruz, almost 500 cases of girls and women who vanished over the past 3 years, and the government count is only 164. Now, this is one egregious case where the effort to crack down on illegal drugs brings about this unacceptable human toll. And the answer is clear. It's rational, but it's politically unacceptable. And that is, you have to legalize drugs and accept the human cost that comes with that, which will be less than what we're seeing today. And I'm linking to the Guardian article about Veracruz, as well as a powerful photo essay that appears on the website of the New York Times today. And I really encourage you to take a look at it. It's grisly, but it is a depiction of just 35 days in Manila in the Philippines, since President Duterte has declared that police can essentially kill drug users and drug dealers on sight. And Duterte issued a kind of amnesty saying, well, before we just murder you, you have a chance to go turn yourself in at the local police station. Well, the photo essay shows that many of the people who observed that turned themselves in, nevertheless have been targeted for summary execution by police. And in this piece entitled, "They Are Slaughtering Us Like Animals," the photographer, and I'm sorry my printout here is too blurry to get his name and credit him properly, but he captured 41 murder scenes, 57 bodies in just 35 days in Manila. And Donald Trump has told Duterte that it's his sovereign right to kill Filipinos at will. No criticism from the Donald on that. And you can imagine that Trump could grab the kind of power that Duterte claims in the Philippines, and you wouldn't expect an attorney general like Jeff Sessions to try to stop him. In Syria, the White Helmets are a controversial group, and a week or so ago, I referenced Gareth Porter's most recent dispatch where he examined the White Helmets and their claim to be these neutral, good Samaritans who are there to rescue innocent civilians caught in the crossfire in this brutal war in Syria. And I have to tell you that I don't exactly know who the White Helmets are, but I'm quite suspicious. I think that they are an asset of the United States and the Saudis and others who actively support the so-called rebel groups in Syria. And so now the White Helmets are putting out an international distress call, saying we are trapped in eastern Aleppo, and they are demanding that the UN and other international groups facilitate their rescue. They fear they will be treated as terrorists and could face detention or execution by advancing troops of the Assad regime. Now, Assad believes that the White Helmets are a Western propaganda tool. The group says it has no political affiliation. They are working only to save civilian lives in a highly dangerous situation. But if that's the case, if they're truly neutral, if the white helmets fly white flags, then why do they feel they need to be evacuated from what could be the final battle for Aleppo? I don't want to see anybody die. I'm not trying to be hard-nosed about this. I'm just suspicious that the white helmets are a propaganda tool. And the Western media just unquestionably passes it along like they are who they say they are. Well, finally today, I want to talk a little bit about life and death for rock stars. Mick Jagger, who is the aging icon of the baby boomer generation, that's me, just had another baby, his 8th child. His partner, American ballerina Melanie Hamrick, is 29 years old. That makes a lot of geezers like me a little jealous. And we say farewell to a great musician, Greg Lake. He was one of the early developers of what was called, both positively and negatively, art rock or progressive rock. He was a co-founder of King Crimson and went on to be a named member of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I never got to see King Crimson, but I enjoyed their music. And I saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer, including one show where I was allowed to observe the show from the stage. And I was very impressed with their musicianship. When they produced the album that included Fanfare for the Common Man, it was just so riveting, so energizing. Anyway, Greg Lake died of cancer at the age of 69. And because of my YouTube rules that I can't put licensed music inside the podcast, I've put up links to some of the great tunes Greg Lake participated in the show file for today's podcast, including a solo song that he wrote called Nuclear Attack, his very popular Christmas song called I Believe in Father Christmas, and the links to the YouTube recordings of the full album of Trilogy by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. So if Greg Lake and these artists are new to you, I invite you to click on the links and do a little musical exploration. Thanks for joining me for my news and comment podcast today. I remain your humble host, Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.